Well, hello. 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 Are we recording? Thumbs up. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. We're very excited. I'm Amy Adler. I'm professor of visual art here at UC San Diego. This is the annual Russell Lecture, which is always a very special evening, and I want to just talk about it for a moment. The Russell Lecture is supported through the generous support of the Russell Foundation. The foundation was established in the will of Betty Russell, one of the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego's founding docents and a longtime supporter of UC San Diego. She specified that funds from the foundation should help, quote, foster the appreciation of study of the modern visual arts and creativity of young artists through support for the museum and the university. So some of our past Russell Lecture speakers have been Shizu Saldamondo, June Edmonds, and Dejeka Crosby, Rodney McMillian, Zachary Drucker, Miguel Calderon, Andrea Bowers, Judith Berry, Tacita Dean, Byron Kim, Tanya Bugera, and Isaac Julian. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jill Dossi, the senior curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, who's going to introduce math. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jill Dossi. As Amy said, I'm senior curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and we're so happy you all could join us on this blustery evening. The Russell Lecture is an important annual collaboration between our two La Jolla-based institutions, which have had a relationship for over 50 years. And before I forget, I want to remind everyone that people under 25 are always free. We have new exhibitions opening next Thursday, so please visit us. So the museum and the visual arts department generally take turns selecting artists to invite for the lecture, but I think this year both sides were mutually and equally enthused about this year's lecturer, Math Bass. Bass is a New York-born, Los Angeles-based artist who is probably best known for their painting practice, but they also work across sculpture, performance, sound, and video. Whether in 3 dimensions or on the 2-dimensional picture plane, Bass arranges objects and images in ways that provoke attention between abstraction and figuration, and between form and performance. Deeply interested in language, Bass has, over the past decade, developed a distinctive lexicon of symbols that are at once recognizable and elusive. I was thinking back, and we in the curatorial department at MCASD began talking about Bass's work almost 10 years ago. In 2017, we were fortunate to acquire for the permanent collection a painting from the artist's signature Newz series. That's Newz with a Z. And in this series, this lexicon of symbols, which often include letters, bodily forms, architectural fragments, and animals, are arranged in a variety of permutations, like musical scores, with each symbol serving as a kind of placeholder for meanings that are always determined by context. And I think there are implications in that for perhaps everything and everyone in life. In the museum's own painting, colorful pyramids contain what appear to be stairs leading to arched doors, but these can also be read as sets of alligator eyes. You would much rather hear from the artist about all this, so let me just conclude this introduction by sharing that Bass received a BA from Hampshire College and an MFA from the University of California, Los Angeles. Their recent solo exhibitions include Math Bass Full Body Parentheses at the Lumber Room, Portland in 2024, A Picture Stuck in the Mirror at the Henry Art Gallery at the University of Washington in 2021, Hammer Projects Math Bass at the Hammer in 2018, Math Bass Crowd Rehearsal at the Jewish Museum, New York in 2017, among others. And Bass's work is held in the collections of MoCA Los Angeles, LACMA, the Hammer, MCASD, the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, Virginia, and other international collections. So please join me in welcoming Math Bass.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be here presenting tonight. It's been a minute since I've done a lecture, and in the past I would start at the present and go back in time. I don't know why, but and this is the first time I'm starting at the past and moving from the past to the present. So begin. So I'm going to start with fresh out of grad school at UCLA. I was invited to do a performance at what was at the time a gallery called Overton and Kite in Hollywood and Los Angeles. And I basically had this image in my mind of a room full of dogs and fog. And when I was invited to do a performance, I thought, well, can we gather 20 or plus dogs and bring together some fog machines and get a group of friends together and basically sing some songs? And that's what this performance ended up being. And there was something about the gathering and the rehearsing and the practicing with this group of people that was as important, you know, it was almost, if not more important than the final outcome. It was this gathering of friends and collecting and joining voices. And let me see if I can play you a little, here we go. This is just a sound clip from, I think we recorded this inside the gallery, so it's pretty echoey. Moses came and picked the arms. Oh, sorry. Moses came and picked the arms. So that was an excerpt from a longer song, and I've worked with a series of songs throughout the course of, over the last decade or so. I have these songs that I've written that cycle through different exhibitions. So that was the birth of that song, and that was just a fragment of a song. And then these were originally costumes that I wore, that I had friends wore, and that I wore inside of a video that I made for my thesis at UCLA. And after I was done shooting, they were hanging around in my studio, and I had kind of thrown one of them over a ladder, and I became really interested in what happened when this tarped performance costume was, juxtaposed with the ladder, and how it kind of created this eerie bodily form. And these were originally built in in relationship to termite tents. Like I saw a mansion that was being tented for termites on Franklin Boulevard, and I was kind of blown away by the spectacle of condemnation, and I just had the thought, well, what would happen if you tented a figure? And then that ended up becoming a performance shoot for a video project. But here it's being exhibited in space as opposed to being in a virtual space. And then I think that there was the ladder, the tarped figure opened up this kind of line of thought around ladders. Though I had performed with ladders previously, like in my early 20s, but so kind of bringing the ladder back in. I've been interested in ladders as props, as architectural forms, as this simple device that moves you through improbable space. So I'm just going to play you. This is a performance document. It's a reenactment of a performance that I had initially done at a project space in Baltimore that was never recorded. So this is me basically like re-recording a fairly improvisational performance that I composed with a few elements. Yeah, so I was, the language is enter this all, enter all this, awoken this morning, morning spelled MOURNING, and just kind of this homage to, this awakening to loss and grief and how to stay present and awake through that. And this document, I haven't looked at it for a long time, but it just, you'll see while we move through more slides that it ends up kind of almost becoming this like channel that fed into like a decade of work. So I'd say that this was the set for the performance that I produced for Made in LA. For the first Made in LA, actually Malik, my former teacher, I was his TA, invited me to be in Made in LA, and it's just interesting. I can see like there's just a direct connection between that like spontaneous performance that I did in Baltimore and then how it led into like a much more elaborate exhibition and body of work. So this was the set for Brutal Set, and it was composed of a series of A-frame and straight ladders that I made, and then concrete casts of Levi 501 jeans. I was walking down the street and I saw a bag of concrete that had gotten wet in the rain and was just held its form, and I thought, oh, you could kind of pour concrete into a pair of jeans and fill them up. So this was the set. It was made out of movable and immovable materials, and there were a series of songs and performers, and again, we met every day for a couple of weeks and came up with a, score and a choreography just based on trial and error and repeating, which culminated in the breaking of a plant at the end of the performance. And then the pot ended up becoming central to this next body of work, which was a two-person show that I did at Human Resources in 2013 with my friend Lighty Churchman, who made a series of small paintings on the walls, and I made a series of sculpture. We had about 3 weeks to make the show, and we just banded together and worked in another friend's studio. And I ended up just kind of investigating the materiality of the pot and then the color of the terracotta, color matching it, spreading that color across multiple forms. And again, this was just kind of all the different like means of exploring that material, and then thinking about like what can you do with canvas and pots and sticks. And this show is called Monte Cristo, and kind of as much about the sandwich as it is about the island. Pot Tower, which is the Brancusi kind of riff, ended up reappearing in later bodies of work, and that's Distressed Mouse in the corner over there. So after that, I kind of was like, all right, I need a little more materiality in my life. I had done a series of performances and videos, and I had been working mostly in performance and videos for years, and I needed something more concrete. And in the summer of 2012, I just moved into my studio storefront that I was living in secretly, kind of closing a retractable gate every night and locking it like no one was there. And I started working on this series, which is Newz, and it was these are the early Newz paintings. So this is just the beginning, and it started with 4 or 5 discrete forms, which over time, through repetition, have evolved into probably like 25 discrete forms. Almost like each individual form was like the root to a language, which has continued to grow more and more elaborate. These are the earlier paintings. And then this was the first solo show that I had in Los Angeles at Overden & Co. at the time, and it was called Lies Inside. And I was interested, there's the expandable gate that I lived with that became central theme in my work. I had come home one night and there was a shadow of the gate cast on the wall of my studio, and I had traced it, and then I wanted to basically like translate the drawing back into a sculpture. And then I was just looking at all of the paintings and all of the forms within the paintings, and I wanted to extract them and physicalize them and kind of create this like three-dimensional template that echoed and mirrored the forms in the paintings. And I was interested in working with this sheet metal because depending on where you were standing, these forms either became like razor thin or grew in volume. These were really like referencing figures, just like what's the most simple way of like subtracting material to, you know, reference a figure. There's another gate. It's like a kind of an inversion and a, what's the opposite of an inversion? And then also, yeah, ladders coming back. I liked that, like, you couldn't really look at anything without looking through something else. And then this next show is called Off the Clock. This was an exhibition that I did at PS1. It was curated by Mia Locks. This was in 2015. And Mia had gone to USC when I was at UCLA, and she was familiar with a fair amount of my sculptural work and my painting practice. And she approached me and was like, let's bring all the sculpture you've been working with since basically since grad school and painting and put it all together in this space. So that was a really exciting prospect. So you can see concrete cast legs from Brutal Set, ladders from Lies Inside, a series of new paintings. This intervention that we did, we cut out openings on two of the walls of the space that one of them was flush and the other opening was slightly ajar. Let's see, almost wide enough to pass through, but not quite. This was the first time that the language wrote an actual word, which was babbo, and then I was like, babbo, what is that? It turns out it means father in Italian. This was basically like a remake of the original pot tower, but instead of the pots just being stacked, I ended up closing up the seams, like erasing them. And then this show was called Bloomies, and this was in Miami in 2015 with a Michael John gallery, no longer open, but it was a great space. And I had ordered a horizontal canvas. I had intended to, I had an image in mind for it, and when it arrived, I saw it and I was like, this is just not gonna work. What am I gonna do? And I laid down on a mat in my studio and took an anxiety nap, and as I was laying down, I just saw the words Bloomingdale's stretch out before me. So. There was a soundtrack that accompanied the show. It was a jingle that my friend's father had written in the 70s, though he never recorded it. It was never written exclusively for Bloomingdale's. He just happened to write a song about Bloomingdale's, so here we go. Here's a rocking chair that was part of the show. I realized that I was somehow processing a certain kind of grief because my mother was ill and had just fallen shortly before making this body of work and had broken her neck. And she loved Bloomingdale's and we would go together. So there was this kind of maternal, the rocking chair, the Bloomingdale's, there was this homage to my mom throughout this show. And I also, this was kind of when this leg motif really came into the picture. Here's a pair of dead stock bell bottoms that I cast in concrete. This is called dead stock. And there's a canvas painted like a cowhide with a yellow dot, cowhide fried egg. Two tall towers that are mirroring or echoing the curves in the Bloomingdale's logo and some of the other forms in the paintings. These arches. This rocking chair, the rocking chair started as like a simple line drawing, and I wanted to take that drawing and basically create a like a line drawing in space. This was almost like Bloomingdale's if it was a playbill. This is at the Newz Museum in Shanghai, and I was invited to make 4 large-scale paintings in conjunction with an exhibition, and they were, I think this was in total 20 by 15 feet, and it's two-sided. One side is basically the lexicon laid out in a grid, and I was just I was thinking about the relationships, the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal relationships of these images, and I also wanted to create a kind of key that you could familiarize yourself with before going into the exhibition, so you could almost like read the paintings. And then the other side of the painting is more of like a landscape with this A wedging between those two matches and the B crowding and igniting them. And then when you enter the space, there's a threshold, a freestanding threshold that was inspired by this ancient rockery garden called the Yuan Garden, where they have all of these serpentine doors, and that's why the show is called Serpentine Doors, these serpentine doorways throughout the garden that frame the interior and exterior vantage points of the space. So I recreated one of the thresholds from the garden, and then the second threshold is one of my objects from my lexicon. This is a diptych. This is, again, the serpentine door informed by the Yuan Garden entrance. There's a lot of doubling, twinning, slight shifts of overlap, revealing, concealing. This is a show, this was called Domino Kingdom. This was at Tanya Leighton in Berlin in 2017. This is further expanding on the tarped form on the ladder. This time I fashioned a jacket out of canvas. The pattern was based on a beloved coat of mine that a friend had given me. And this was, I had an ironing board that I used in my studio. It was a table, and I still use it. And I recreated it, and then had this kind of interested in like something between a garment and a duffel bag. Paintings inside the exhibition across the street. So there were 2 spaces that were it was the same space, but they were across the street from each other. This was where I worked with this speech bubble form a lot, and this was actually where it came from. It was originally it was a bone that was behind a dome with a staircase, and I was like, oh, there's a speech bubble. So that ended up becoming like a pretty prominent icon that I work with. And this is at the Jewish Museum. This is called Crowd Rehearsal, and this was another version of the ladder, except that I think this was about like 11 feet tall with a really long coat. The show is called Crowd Rehearsal. I was kind of interested in the idea that a crowd is inherently not really something that you can rehearse. It's by nature, it's not really kind of organic and out of control. So the diptych was just a subtle shift of placement of the flower on the right. And then there was another version of the coat that was stationed inside of the coat check, and depending on the volume of guests, it would become more or less visible as it moved around all day, the space in the lobby. This is a show that I did with Mary Boone called My Dear, Dear Letter. This show also had a soundtrack. It was, I revisited a lot of the songs that I had originally sung with Dogs and Fog, and I re-recorded them with friends. I'm going to play you one of the tracks that we re-recorded for this exhibition. If I can.
Kiss and shit and wine, why not? Kiss and shit and wine. Kiss and shit and wine, why not? Kiss and shit and wine. Vultures came and picked the bones, picked the bones, ate them dry. Vultures came and picked the bones, ate them dry. When they left nothing, nothing left but hair. Here it rests in storm and smoke, stormy, smoky sky. Here it rests in stormy smoke, storm and smoking sky. Here it rests in storm and smoke, ate them dry.
And that sound was coming out of those sound towers. The voices were split between left and right speakers, so that you really felt the space between the voices, between the two voices. They were recorded in stereo. So there was a higher voice on the left and a deeper voice on the right, and when you stood between them, they really resonated against your body. Just kind of like a film strip here. Oh, that's my baby. here are a couple paintings that ended up informing the walls of the Hammer lobby. So they were originally paintings, and then we scaled them up to cover all of the surfaces in the stairwell. I really wanted to follow the lines of the architecture and kind of like span the stairs with these forms, the dog grounded at the bottom, and then descending the stairs, you're following this leg. This piece was called Pink Dots. This is, to name a few, this was in Berlin in 2019. This is called War Flower. It's this picture of I saw a picture of a stealth bomber at the Rose Bowl parade that I saved in newspaper clipping back in like 2011, and so I was kind of spooked out by that graphic quality of the stealth bomber. This is Scotty dog. It's made out of aluminum. I always thought of these as being like the talking heads, like newscasters. This is a show that I did in Seoul with very small fires. It was called Fill It Up Silver. When I was growing up in New York, I think there was a rule against pumping your own gas, and my mom would pull up to the gas station and say, "Fill it up, Silva." And I was in the desert in the spring of 2019, and I was sitting in my friend's backyard during sunset, and I saw a raven flying across the sky with a white square in its beak, and I was like, what is that? And I dropped it, and I watched it fall. When I walked up to it, it was a piece of white bread that was so stale it had just cracked into 3 pieces, so I gathered it, cast it in silver, kind of just memorializing that moment and also kind of filling this thing that's inherently empty up with value, filling it up with silver. There's a series of paintings that were exhibited with that sculpture, thinking about this slash as this kind of rhythm and slashing of the canvas and distributing the weight between the two sides, and also acting as a kind of punctuation between the image and kind of like a slice. It's like kind of also thinking about just the animation of between one image and the next, appearing and disappearing of forms. And then we hit the pandemic, and I ended up being away from home for 2 months. I didn't expect to be gone for that long, and when I came back to my studio, I just could not paint with gouache on raw canvas anymore. I just went to do it. Every time I went to work, I physically couldn't do it. And then basically that summer, my mom, who had been sick, for my entire adult life, my mom, started showing signs of Parkinson's when I was 21, fell really ill, and it was apparent that she was not going to survive. And this was kind of happening at the same time as that I was starting to paint with oil. I stopped painting with gouache. I started painting with oil. I was grieving the imminent death of my mother, and then my mother died. So this is kind of the camel skeleton was really holding this grief in this period of time. And when I started this painting, my mother was alive, and by the time I finished it, my mother had passed away. And everything about my life shifted, and it was just a complete and total shift of perspective and meaning. So the show that basically I was working on up until her death and then finished after her passing was called Desert Veins, and there's and this was also kind of as I was beginning to explore a new medium, because I just found it impossible to work with gouache on raw canvas anymore. So there's just a lot of grief and heaviness, and I was also like doing something I'd never done before, and in the process of learning how to paint with this new material, it was challenging and humiliating, and I could really feel when I was connecting with the material, and I could really feel when I was disconnecting, and it was so pleasurable to connect and so painful to disconnect. And so this show is just kind of a heavy one for me. And then slowly coming out of the grieving process, joy, buoyancy, levity starts to reappear in the work, and I start to just feel like I can connect with the material in like a really organic and free-form and loose way. And it's just, so basically this is just a huge shift of practice for me. Still working with the lexicon, but just, I don't know, it kind of softened up and loosened up. This is a show called Roses Are Red that I did in New York with Tanya Benakdar in September of 2023. My God, 23. Yeah, September 23. My studio was in this building in Los Angeles called the American Cement Building that has this concrete lattice covering the exterior of the building, so it frames my view when I'm working, and I wanted to reproduce that and bring it into the space and frame the show. And I also realized that if you remove part of the X, you get a Y. So this was called Chromosomal Wall, which was framing the entrance of the show and also framing some of the work and creating this binary situation that you have two sides. You have to choose which side you're going to enter. These sculptures were created mostly as architectural props for this show. These were called full body parentheses, and they're informed by a lamp that I found at a thrift store. It was about, like, I don't know, 2 feet high, and I was really intrigued by it. It appeared to be handmade by someone. It wasn't manufactured. It seemed like it might have been made in the 70s, I don't know. But I just really wanted to basically blow it up so that it would act as a threshold for the body to pass through in a framing device and kind of act as these parentheses for the body. This is called Victoria's Secret. Here's Newz. This was I found a needle point at a flea market, and this was basically like a blown up painting of the needle point. So it's called Perfume Map. It's called Pin the Nose on the Clown. I found, again, at a different estate sale, this was at this people's home, and they seem to have had like a really rich and beautiful life together. You could just tell by all the stuff. And there was this one game from the 60s called Pin the Nose on the Clown that had clearly been folded and refolded and pinned like a million times, and I was moved by it, and this was the image of the clown. And this was a pillowcase that my grandmother used to own that she gave me before I went to college, and I made a painting of it. There we go. This is called Airplane. This is Perfume Matrix. It's a larger version of Perfume Map. So I sometimes like to repeat and scale up and kind of have this psychic mapping of spaces and repetition of images throughout one space. Not psycho, psychic. The two apples. This is a show that I did this past spring at the Lumber Room. They invited me to do a show, and I was like, I've never shown exclusively, just like my entire or most of my sculptural practice. So this was kind of like a survey of the sculpture that I'd made over the last decade. Entering this space, we had created this threshold with curtains and programmed a spotlight to, let me see if I can kind of mimic like as if the performer was about to go on stage. This was programmed to, and this was, entrance was called Protracted Blue. I always love that moment before a performance starts when the spotlight is roving around and searching for the performer. Or when they jog the light around, you know. So this is just a little video clip of the entrance to the show. And I wanted it to like really feel like there was someone behind the light, so I worked with a programmer to kind of mimic the hand as much as possible. I'm gonna keep going. Let's see. So this is from the other side, and we had put basically put like a scrim of orange material over the skylight above the stairwell to cast an orange glow as you entered the space. This is another ladder for my series of ladders. The first painting that you encounter is just a small, quick cloud painting. And upon entering, this is basically like a lot of the work together in one place for the first time, and then we worked with a sculptor in Portland to recreate full body parentheses, like in a sturdier version that wasn't a prop, but the proper formal sculpture. We painted a gradient across one of the walls. Here's the crowd rehearsal. The apple was on a plinth. The apple was slowly spinning. It's just really interested in the body appearing and disappearing and all of the relationships between these forms, and then just what it felt like to move through space and experience my own body in relationship to all of these bodily reference forms. And I painted there's a remake of Pot Tower, which ended up kind of being a little bit more of a prop than a proper Pot Tower. And then I painted a sculpture with an assistant. Not a sculpture, I painted a mural on this wall. This was a kind of, we called this the childscape. And then, this soundtrack was playing.
Scores of blood and fire and freeways. I am going to get my share. Scores of blood and fire and freeways. I am going to get my share.
Okay, let's keep going. Series of small paintings that were not in the main space, but off to the side. Okay, and then there was the video of the tarped tent in the back theater. And then this is the last show that went down, and it was up in LA. It opened in November and it came down in January. This is called Monday's Child, and so much about the making of the show was painted during the anticipation of the birth of my daughter, and This painting is called Mother. This is called Thursday's Child. Rotation in red. Bichon yellow. There were 3 rotating apples. That's Monday's Child for the moon. So day and night, diptych hanging across space. This was, the Sound Towers were playing a field recording that I'd taken of a murder of crows, which I'm not going to play right now because we are running out of time. And that's it. Sure.
Does anyone have any questions on that?
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for the talk.
Thank you.
I really was interested in the term you used, emptying, and I was wondering with your decisions of sculpture, this kind of abstraction that you do, they're very personal. They originate from experiences with your family and intimate, but then you kind of remove all these things. And you kind of go into forms that are just reminiscent, barely. And I was wondering if also the fabrication of the works is also kind of emptying.
Is the fabrication emptying? I don't know. I guess I'm not sure if I think of them exactly as emptying. I mean, I think maybe you're thinking of the bread, filling it up and emptying. I was thinking about just how almost like this substance of white bread is just this empty thing, and then filling that thing up with meaning, or how we take these open containers and we fill them up with meaning. They don't always have there's not an inherent meaning to every form, or we find meaning through use and repetition. I like to almost think about what is like the most economic means of communicating what something is, or how to like really pare something down to its basic elements. Does that make sense?
With the, like, kind of to expand on that, when you switch to oil painting, it's less economic, isn't it? When you're looking at the surface detail, not as stripped down. It kind of looks like, it's hard to see, but it looks like there's a lot of kind of cloudy surface buildup.
Yeah. I think I reached a certain point where it was no longer pleasurable to produce like a super flat surface, and I wanted something else, and I wanted a different kind of material. And I love the time that you can really embed in oil paint. I like the slowness of the material. I like the flexibility of it. I think there was something about the way that I had made paintings for years that was really rigid. Like I was painting without tapes on raw canvas, and there was no room for error. And then suddenly feeling like I couldn't leave my house, I couldn't go to the grocery store, I couldn't see my friends, I couldn't touch anyone, I couldn't make painting like that anymore. It was like too much restriction in my external environment to create that much restriction in my intimate spaces, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. There also seemed to be a stronger design relationship to the earlier paintings, pre-oil paint, because oil paint lends this like hand, a really immediate touch thing. And could you talk a little bit more about your relationship to design?
I didn't study design. I'm not like, it's not like a formal, not like formally trained in design. I'm interested in the tension of an image, and I guess that any design has an inherent investigation in the tension of an image, or what makes an image active, what makes an image feel like it's, I don't know, I guess doing something. Yeah. experience like the tension between objects and image almost sonically. Like I can feel them getting closer to each other, pulling far apart, like the negative space, and almost has like a sound to me.
Is there, like over time, by repeating the lexicon and the different forms and shapes, and it seems like there's I wonder if there's like meaning that you attribute to each shape that stays consistent with that shape, and if the combinations have almost like I don't know if like a secret kind of narrative or something makes sense, but I just wondered if they have specific meanings to you and how that's evolved over time.
I think of them as words, not like a specific word, but like almost if you like were composing like a sentence, and then it's like this is a word, this is a sentence, this is a paragraph.
And are they specific sentences in your mind?
It's more about how it feels when I'm putting them together, and like it's like a phenomenological experience of what they're doing together and what they've done, and like what the potential is for what they can do. Like what are all the different permutations of this like pared down language of images, and like the potential for what they can do together.
So they take into account what they've been before, in a way, like you.
Like each one is sort of like almost like a fresh, like a coming from a fresh place, and it's like I kind of start at a real blank drawing board in a way. I mean, like there are some forms that it's like, yes, that is the letter Z, or yes, that is a crocodile, but it's not like the crocodile went to the store
Right.
and bought flowers,
Yeah.
or like whatever.
Right.
But yeah.
Right.
But I like that there's a tension between certain forms that are recognizable and others that are more obtuse or more architectural.
Thanks so much. Yeah, sort of in relation to this last question, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how narrative functions in your work, because I think I mentioned to you before, like I'd only seen your paintings sort of in isolation, and I feel like I've been missing out, like between the sonic elements, the songs, and then these really sort of deliberately choreographed installations. I was thinking about them more as these sort of like symbolic compositions. So I'm really curious.
Yeah. One thing I will say, though, is that the forms usually do maintain a specific color. So the color is less interchangeable. But I think that the relationship between images and objects and the viewer, and for me, has always been like really important for like the experiential quality of a body of work. Like it's not just like I'm looking at a painting, but I'm looking at a painting and I'm standing next to a full body parenthesis, or I just passed through this object to get to that object, and I like to invite the viewer to kind of experience the performativity of that work, or almost like become a performer in the piece. I don't have any specific like desires for them to have like a. I'm not trying to control their experience, but I want them to have an experience. If that makes sense. And I guess I do think about our bodies in space, our bodies being informed by and performing for all of these spaces that we pass through, performance histories, bodies in space. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of music associated with a lot of your work.
kind of stuff. Do you listen to a lot of music while you're creating, while you're making different artwork?
It depends. I don't listen to podcasts when I'm painting. I listen to music if I'm going to listen to anything, or it's quiet. But I often have music playing. I don't play instruments, but I've always loved singing. I've loved singing with groups of people. I love almost like composing these like monastic chants. They're not, I don't sit down like, what am I going to write today? But they come into my head, and then I like record them. And then they come into my head. It's usually like a sentence. And I think of it like as like a poetic, yeah, it's like poetics. And so I don't forget it. I repeat it over and over and over again until I can record it. So a lot of the songs come in that way. And a lot of the songs are also just kind of, I notice that there's a tension in the songs in the way that like what I love about like the poetics of language is when things are just pulling in two different directions at the same time, and like what is that space between the stretch, you know? How language mirrors and changes through repetition has always been like interesting to me. Yeah, it's fun to have a soundtrack for a show.
Have you found in your travels and in studios and different locations that the imagery changes? And maybe it's weather, maybe it's culture, maybe it's food. Are there
Yeah,
ambient
definitely.
influences that are impactful?
I feel like I've been in a few studios, you know, where you really like get so intimate in that space. And like I feel like every space that I've been in, I've noticed some kind of shift in my work because it's just informed by a new environment. I haven't done that many residencies, but when I haven't done, the ones that I have done that were like more like studio art residencies, like I've just felt that they did like inform the work. I can't exactly like explain like how, but I do think that like every time I move into a new space, which is like, you know, every 4 or 5 years, it's like, okay, you don't have to get too comfy here. It's time to go somewhere else. That I do notice that there's a shift or a expansion. I think that like anytime you change your immediate environment, you open up to an opportunity to expand in some way. Like when I went to Shanghai to do the site visit for the Newz Museum, I went to the Rockery Garden, and that informed all of the thresholds that ended up also becoming some icons that I used in paintings.
Could you talk a little bit about your relationship to like the studio, but also to fabrication in general?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you could, you know, do you see any correspondences between your work and other people working today
Mhm.
and sound and art?
I am typically I was sort of like a 9 to 5er, like going in there, just, not more like a 10 to 5er, but, so I do, like I have maintained like a pretty just consistent studio practice. Whether I'm doing stuff or not, I go in. Now that I have like a 8-month-old, my schedule is a little bit different. It's more like a 12 to 4, and it's a little bit more like, okay, what am I gonna do today? Like, I don't really like have the language spaciousness at the moment, so it's a little bit more like get in there, do what I gotta do and get out at the moment. But it actually is like really kind of, you think about all the time that you spend just doing nothing, which is like in the studio, which is amazing and very important, but when you can't do that, you can also be extremely economical, and I'm finding that I can get a lot done in 4 hours. Some of the forms I've worked with fabricators, most of them, and some of them I've made myself. It just depends. Like I don't know how to weld or bend steel, so I'm gonna outsource that. Like, can I like do body work on an apple and paint it myself? Like yes, like, or I'll have someone like carve a stem for me, like a friend. Like I try to work with friends as much as possible if I'm gonna fabricate a sculpture. If I can do it myself, I'll do it, but with sculpture, unless it's made out of like canvas that's painted, I'm usually gonna work with someone. Or a wooden ladder, yes, like I make that, but just depends.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.